Hi, I'm Terry Kolath. I'm here today with one of our own doing a coffee with a neighbor. This neighbor is Paul Yacovitch. I know you recognize him, Director of Facility Operations here at Shell Point. We're talking about a program he's going to do for us in the Academy on Vietnam. Thank you for joining me, Paul.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Terry.
Well, I remember well when you talked about seeing the presentation by Professor Kerr, The History of Vietnam. And I was just so delighted to talk to you about your experiences because my late husband had been a Vietnam veteran.
Correct.
And you had such an amazing experience. And that, along with some things that happened to you in your past, led you to develop a presentation. Tell us about that.
First of all, I want to thank you for allowing me to be here because the Academy does so much for our residents. And
thanks.
to be a part of that is a thrill for me. As you mentioned earlier, the presentation by Professor Kerr and the history of Vietnam was extremely interesting. But I couldn't help but not notice that there were a lot of resident interest. And I know there were a lot of Vietnam veterans in there. So that
Absolutely.
Vietnam War is not just a part of the veterans' life, but it's certainly an integral part of our American history.
It absolutely is, and to have such a key role in it. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to a kind of presentation that you're going to do.
It really does have an interesting start to this. In the early 80s, I was the professor of military science. I was at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington, and I was responsible for the ROTC program there. Midway through my tour, there was a political science professor that was providing an accredited class on Vietnam and the politics behind it. Her story was that her husband at the time was an Air Force pilot, B-52 pilot, actively dropping bombs in Vietnam while she was protesting against the war in California. Needless to say, their marriage didn't last after that. But so fast forward to Washington State University and her class. To her credit, she wanted to provide a balance to her class. And knowing that I was a Vietnam veteran and an aviator and a pilot, she asked that I make this presentation. So I did. I put it together, which is, it gives an overview of what my mission was, but also there's a little geography to it. There's my association with and experience with the people that I met there. So that's sort of how this all came together.
And a lot of research. You put a lot of research into this.
Well, it's, it's all from my personal photos. And personal photos, when I look back, this is 1969, 1970. And I was a 21, 22-year-old young man right out of flight school. After my flight school experience, 220 flight hours, I was flying attack helicopters in a combat situation. It makes for growing up rather quickly.
It certainly does. And I just can't help but think, Paul, with the Ken Burns series on Vietnam, and then Professor Kerr doing the history from beginning until today, and what you're going to do, it just mirrors not only what happened then, but what's going on in our country today.
True. I mean, there's war is war, and you can argue for it or argue against it. But the actual conflict, wherever it may be, or the timing, I think it has the same impact on our society.
And back then, I say back in the day, we didn't really realize the ramifications. We hadn't named them yet. World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, we hadn't named the things that can happen to someone in combat, and started to look at specific treatments for them. Yeah. And to hear from somebody who had an experience there is kind of priceless, because although it was a war for all of us, not all of us had the experience.
Yes. And I know, I know from personal experience that veterans, because they experience a lot in combat, if you talk to a civilian who doesn't have that experience, there's no common ground. There's no way you can really fully express what you feel, what you see in a combat situation. And consequently, we have a lot of veterans that don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Or that will talk it amongst themselves. And in my experience, it's been, and this presentation is part of it, part of my ability to live with my experience has been the ability or the opportunity to discuss and talk about it.
To work through it and share it with all of us. Well, I think it goes without saying that there must have been, in addition to many other factors, a lot that 21-year-old young man learned that helps you to do the massive job that you do today, to direct our entire facility operations in a community of this size.
I wouldn't make the comparison, but when things get going rough in the past, and there's high stress, and no, I have to think back when a lot of things have happened simultaneously. I have to remind myself, as long as somebody's not shooting at me, it can't be all that bad.
That's perfect. I love another thing that you said. If it stands still, we'll probably paint it. You have these wonderful sayings. Well, I do hope you'll join us, Coffee with the Neighbor, number 3, in the Academy with our own Director of Facility Operations, Paul Yacovitch, sharing his stories with us and his past history with our Vietnam War. Join us, please.